There is a particular kind of silence that settles over Colorado Springs in the early hours of a December morning. It's not just quiet, it's weighted. The kind of silence that feels almost sacred, like the world itself is holding its breath before something changes forever. Snow falls soft and steady over the high plains. The Rockies loom in the distance, invisible in the darkness but present, immovable, watching. And in a residential apartment complex in the northeastern part of the city, in a neighborhood called Palomino Ranch, a family had spent December 18th behind closed doors. The neighbors heard nothing unusual. They had no reason to look twice. No screaming, no commotion, nothing to pierce that beautiful, terrible silence. Whatever happened inside that apartment at the address on Palomino Ranch Point, it happened without fanfare, quietly, with a step-by-step progression that investigators would later argue was the product of planning rather than impulse. It wasn't until after midnight, 12:29 in the morning on December 19, 2023, that the 911 call came in. A woman's voice, strained, describing a burglary, an intruder, an attack, and her children were dead. Colorado Springs Police Department officers arrived to find 35-year-old Kimberlee Singler in the apartment with superficial knife wounds. Her eldest daughter, identified in court documents only by her initials, MW, who was 11 years old at the time, was also injured and was transported to a local hospital for treatment. Officers moved through the apartment and found what no first responder ever wants to find in a child's bedroom: two small bodies, still, beyond the reach of anything medicine or prayer could do. 9-year-old Elianna Wentz, known to everyone who loved her as Ellie, and 7-year-old Aden Wentz. Two children who, by every right, should have been asleep under the warm glow of Christmas lights, with their whole futures stretched out ahead of them. Two children who became the center of one of the most heartbreaking, most complicated, and most internationally discussed criminal cases Colorado had seen in years. And at the center of it all, the woman sitting in that apartment with shallow knife wounds and a story about a stranger. A woman who told police that an intruder had done this. A woman who denied attacking her children. And a woman who, according to her surviving daughter's account as later presented in UK court documents, had said something during those final moments in that bedroom that no one who has followed this case has been able to unhear. God made me do it. This is the story of Kimberlee Singler, the Colorado Springs mother who allegedly drugged her own children with sleeping medication, guided them to a bedroom with their eyes closed, and then systematically took from them the only thing no court order, no custody arrangement, and no legal battle could ever give back. It is the story of a 5-year custody war so corrosive, so all-consuming, that prosecutors would argue it became the engine that drove a woman to the most unthinkable act a parent can commit. It is the story of a little girl, MW, who survived something no child should survive, who initially told the story her mother asked her to tell, and who ultimately found the courage to tell the truth. And it is the story of two children, Ellie and Aden Wentz, who deserved immeasurably better than the ending they received. We are going to go through this case from the very beginning. The marriage, the divorce, the legal war, the night itself, the investigation, the flight across an ocean, the 2-year battle in the British courts, and where this case stands as of early 2026. This is not a story built from rumors or speculation. Every detail discussed today has been drawn from court documents, autopsy reports, police arrest affidavits, prosecutors' statements in open court, UK court filings, and reporting by multiple major news organizations including the BBC, the Associated Press, CBS News, the Denver Gazette, and KRDO. Let's get into it. Before December 2023, before the headlines and the extradition hearings and the London courtrooms, before any of this became a story, there was just a woman named Kimberlee. The public record on Kimberlee Singler's early biographical background is limited. We don't have extensive detail about her childhood, her upbringing, or her life before the marriage that would eventually define her public narrative. What we do know is the version of her that emerged through the custody filings, the court proceedings, and the accounts given by people who intersected with her during the years that matter most to this case. At some point, Kimberlee met a man named Kevin Wentz. They married and built a life together in Colorado. They had 3 children, all of them born before the marriage began to crack. Their eldest daughter, MW, was born first. Then came Elianna, Ellie, and then Aden, the youngest, completing the family. 3 kids, a home, a life that, from the outside, looked like the ordinary architecture of a family finding its footing. Colorado Springs, where the family was based, sits at an elevation of roughly 6,000 feet at the base of Pikes Peak, in El Paso County. It's a city with a strong military presence. Fort Carson is there, and Peterson Space Force Base, and it has the character of a community-oriented place. A city where families plant themselves in suburban neighborhoods and build routines around school drop-offs and the rhythms of a life that feels predictable and safe. Palomino Ranch, in the northeastern part of the city, is that kind of neighborhood. Apartment complexes and quiet residential streets. The kind of area where a family in crisis can fracture entirely out of sight of the people next door. What picture emerges of Kimberlee as a mother? From the custody records and the statements of people connected to the case, she was present, intensely so. Her children were her identity, her priority, the fixed point around which everything else in her life orbited. In the narrative she'd constructed around herself, particularly as her marriage fell apart, she was the devoted parent, the one who was always there, the one who fought, the one who put the children first, always. Hold on to that image, because what the prosecution would later argue is that the devotion itself became something dangerous, that what Kimberlee Singler experienced as love began, over the course of 5 years of legal war, to curdle into something else, something possessive, something that could not tolerate the possibility of loss. And that when the loss finally felt inevitable and imminent, the love that had driven her to fight in every courtroom in El Paso and Larimer counties drove her, allegedly, to something far darker. Kevin Wentz was the other side of this story. The father, a man who, according to his legal team, wanted nothing more than to be in his children's lives, to have time with them, to have a relationship with them, to be their dad. What unfolded between the filing of divorce papers in 2018 and the events of December 18, 2023, is a multi-year saga of legal conflict that ended in the worst possible way. Kimberlee Singler filed the petition for divorce from Kevin Wentz in 2018. The children were young, a family dissolving. At the beginning, there may have been some hope that the separation could be managed with civility for the sake of the children, if nothing else. That hope did not last long. By September 2018, just months after the filing, the proceedings had become what Kevin Wentz's attorney Jennifer Darby later told CNN was a period in which Singler began making serious accusations of child abuse and domestic violence against Kevin. Those allegations, Darby noted, seemed to arise in alignment with Kevin's scheduled parenting time. When the calendar said it was Kevin's turn with the kids, a legal crisis would materialize. Now this needs to be handled carefully. Allegations of domestic violence and child abuse in custody disputes are serious and deserve serious evaluation. Courts don't dismiss these things lightly. And in this particular case, the courts evaluated these allegations, they heard testimony, they examined evidence, and the court found that restricting Wentz's parenting time was not warranted. The children were returned to shared custody arrangements, but the legal filings did not stop. The years between 2018 and 2023 were a relentless churn of court appearances, motions, counter-motions, and legal maneuvering. On May 22, 2019, the court considered a formal request from Singler to restrict the amount of time her ex-husband could spend with the children. Delays in scheduling a hearing followed, and by August 28, 2019, Singler had stopped responding to the court's attempts to contact her. She had to be served a court summons at her home address. The pattern of Singler engaging fiercely, and then falling silent when rulings didn't go her way would repeat itself throughout the years that followed. By 2020, the case had been transferred to another judge, and court documents indicate the couple made some effort to work toward a separation agreement and co-parenting plan. But that window of relative cooperation closed quickly. On January 5, 2021, Singler filed a motion to move the children to Florida with her and assume immediate sole and temporary parental responsibility over all three of them. She and Kevin debated this request throughout 2021. Then, on October 20, 2022, Kevin Wentz filed his own emergency motion, this one specifically to prevent abduction and to terminate the stipulated order that had allowed the children to move to Florida with Singler. About a week later, a court scheduled an abduction prevention hearing. Singler, in what was becoming a pattern, did not appear. The court attempted to contact her by phone and by mail to her home address. She did not respond. These were not minor procedural missteps. A parent who repeatedly fails to appear at court-ordered hearings, who files emergency motions, and then ignores the court's scheduling of those very motions. This is a pattern that, in retrospect, speaks to someone navigating the legal system not as a process to follow, but as a tool to control outcomes. Each time a ruling went against her, the next filing seemed designed not to resolve the dispute, but to delay, to complicate, to block. By May 13, 2023, Kevin Wentz was once again asking the court to modify parenting time. A month later, the court appointed a child and family investigator to assess the situation, a significant step that signals a court taking a deeper look at the dynamics surrounding the children. In August 2023, another set of failures. On August 7, the court ordered Singler to appear in response to her own emergency motion to restrict Kevin's parenting time. She failed to appear after sufficient time was given. The court declined to move forward with her request. She filed again to restrict Kevin's parenting time on August 22, 2023. There was a delay in her arrival at court. After testimony was heard, the court ruled on September 9, 2023 that it did not find Kevin's time with the children would endanger their physical health or impair their emotional development. Her motion to restrict Kevin's parenting time was denied again. September 2023 also brought a separate escalation. Singler filed for a temporary protection order in El Paso County, this time alleging that Kevin had waved a knife at her. Kevin denied the allegations. The protection order was initially granted, but when the matter went to Larimer County Court on November 7, 2023, the court denied Singler's request to be excluded from polygraph testing. Then, on November 17, 2023, after hearing testimony, the court ruled that Kevin would not endanger the children's physical health or impair their emotional development, and terminated the restriction on his parenting time. At that same November period, the court issued an additional directive. Singler and Kevin were ordered to communicate solely through the Parenting App Close, a monitoring tool designed for high-conflict custody situations that creates a documented record of communication. The court also ordered that Singler bring the children to visit their father for the period between December 16 and December 30, one time specifically designated to compensate for parenting time Kevin had missed while the allegations against him were being investigated. The exchanges would happen at police stations, in Colorado Springs and in Greeley, to ensure that the transfers were supervised and documented. December 16, 2023, the start of the court-ordered custody period. Singler did not show up. She did not bring the children to the Colorado Springs police station for the exchange. She did not respond to Kevin Wentz. She did not respond to his attorney, Jennifer Darby. She had gone completely silent. Kevin and his attorney filed an emergency motion for law enforcement assistance to enforce parenting time. On December 18, 2023, the court granted that motion. But there was a significant nuance embedded in the December 18 order, one that matters to understanding the pressure of that day. According to state court records cited by ABC 7, and the Associated Press, Singler was not simply ordered to hand over the children immediately. The order gave her a choice. She could either comply voluntarily by giving the children to Kevin herself, or she could appear at a court hearing on December 20, just 2 days away, to exchange custody there. December 18th. The court had just given her until December 20 to act, 2 days to make a decision, 2 days before the system would formally enforce what she had been resisting for weeks. This could imply, given what allegedly followed that same day, that the framing of December 18 as a final deadline, a day when options had narrowed to almost none, was not an accident in the prosecution's narrative. The timing is, at minimum, a fact that investigators have treated as deeply significant. What happened in that apartment on December 18th, according to the prosecution and the account of the surviving daughter, is what we turn to now. This is the section that is the hardest to write and probably the hardest to listen to, because this is where we talk about what allegedly happened to Ellie and Aden and their older sister. It deserves to be handled carefully and without sensationalism, because what these children experienced was real, and the people who loved them are real, and the weight of those facts deserves respect. But you need to know what is alleged to have happened, because without it, the full reality of what Ellie and Aden endured gets lost in the legal language and the extradition paperwork. According to MW's account, as documented in UK court proceedings and reported by the Associated Press and ABC7 News among others, the evening of December 18th began with something ordinary, something children do every day without a second thought. Their mother gave them milk. Milk with a powdery substance mixed into it. That substance was later identified through the autopsy process. Doxylamine, an antihistamine medication commonly used as an over-the-counter sleep aid, sold under brand names including Unisom sleep tabs. Officers who searched the apartment found 2 empty boxes of Unisom sleep tabs inside the home. The autopsies confirmed that both Ellie and Aden had toxic or potentially toxic levels of doxylamine in their systems at the time of their deaths, according to the arrest affidavit. Think about what that means for a moment. This was not a spontaneous act of violence erupting from a moment of uncontrolled emotion. This required obtaining the medication, going to a store, purchasing Unisom sleep tabs, bringing them home. It required deciding how the drug would be administered and to whom. The prosecution's central argument is that the presence of doxylamine demonstrates premeditation, that a decision had been made before December 18th ever began. After the children drank the milk, MW told investigators, their mother said to close their eyes. She then guided them toward a bedroom. The youngest two, Ellie and Aden, did not walk out of that bedroom again. What happened in the bedroom, according to MW's account as documented in UK court proceedings and presented by prosecutors, is as follows. Their mother had a gun, a handgun that investigators believe was one Singler kept in her bedroom closet. The children had been sedated with doxylamine, reducing their capacity to resist or flee. Both Ellie and Aden were shot, and both also sustained stab wounds, injuries confirmed in the autopsy reports and reflected in the murder charges, which describe both shooting and stabbings of the 2 children. MW was in that bedroom too, and MW experienced something almost unimaginable. Her mother came for her as well. According to MW's account, her mother cut her neck with a knife. When MW begged her to stop, when this 11-year-old child pleaded for her own life, her mother slashed her again. And through all of it, according to MW's account as presented in UK court documents, her mother offered an explanation. God made me do it. According to the prosecutors who presented this at the London extradition hearing, Singler told MW that God was instructing her, that the reason, the divine reason, her children were being killed was because their father was going to take them away, that what she was doing had been ordained. This account, which MW gave to an investigator after being placed in foster care, was documented in UK court records and became one of the most cited pieces of evidence at the London extradition proceedings. After everything that allegedly happened in that bedroom, Kimberlee Singler did not call 911, not for hours. When she eventually did call, she described the situation this way. An unknown male intruder had come through the unlocked side door of the apartment from the patio at around 11 in the morning on December 18th. The attacker grabbed her and she fainted, losing consciousness. When she woke up, she found her two youngest children already dead in the bedroom. She told police she was too weak to go searching for her phone. She said she spent the rest of December 18th lying near her injured daughter, bringing her water periodically. She said she finally located her phone after it randomly started playing music, which alerted her to its location, allowing her to call police. The 911 call came at 12:29 in the morning on December 19th. From the time she claimed the attack occurred, approximately 11 a.m. on December 18th, to the moment she picked up a phone, more than 13 hours had passed. Two dead children lay in the bedroom. Her injured daughter lay nearby. And according to her account, she spent over 13 hours unable to find a phone. In her interview with law enforcement, she could not provide a detailed description of the alleged intruder, only that the figure was dark and she believed to be male. She also made additional allegations, telling police that her ex-husband had previously dreamt about killing his family, that he was always trying to frame her and get her arrested, and that he had likely sent someone to the home on his behalf, according to Judge John Zanni's later summary of her claims as stated in his January 2025 ruling. The name of the specific individual she pointed to was redacted from public court documents. During a search of the apartment, officers found one more detail worth noting: ripped-up court documents from the Larimer County custody case, the legal war that had consumed 5 years of her life, torn apart by her own hands inside that apartment. Colorado Springs police officers arrived just after 12:29 a.m. on December 19th to a scene that, even in those earliest moments, presented problems for the story they were being told. The side door of the apartment, the entry point Singler described, opened onto a patio. Outside that patio, December had done what December does in Colorado. It had left snow on the ground. And when investigators examined that snow, they found nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the snow consistent with a person walking to or from that patio. Colorado snow in December is not subtle. A person walking across it leaves a record. There was no record. Based on what investigators know about the scene, the absence of footprints alone was enough to fundamentally undermine the intruder narrative at the first examination. The door itself showed no signs of forced entry. The patio door Singler described as the intruder's access point showed no damage, no prying, nothing broken. She had described it as unlocked, which is possible in principle, but the physical evidence surrounding it matched no crime of entry. Inside the apartment, on the floor outside the bedroom closet, officers found a handgun covered in blood. Investigators made a critical observation about this weapon. The evidence indicated the gun had been loaded after the person handling it already had blood on their hands. Think through what that means in terms of sequence. If an intruder had entered with a loaded weapon, loading after blood contact would not fit the expected timeline. But if someone had first used a knife, accumulating blood on their hands in the process, and then loaded a firearm, the sequence would explain exactly the pattern investigators observed. The crime scene was telling its own story, and it was a different story from the one Singler had told. The autopsy results, when they came back, added another dimension of clarity. The reports confirmed that both Ellie and Aden had been shot and had sustained stab wounds. Both children had toxic or potentially toxic levels of doxylamine in their systems, levels consistent with the 2 empty boxes of Unisom sleep tabs found in the apartment. The autopsies confirmed, unambiguously, that the deaths were the result of the deliberate actions of another person. DNA analysis on both the handgun and the knife recovered from the scene returned a mixed profile. The DNA was consistent with the blood of the children and consistent with Kimberlee Singler. There was no DNA profile consistent with an unknown male intruder on either weapon. Meanwhile, Kevin Wentz's whereabouts on December 18th were independently verifiable. His truck had GPS tracking. His location could be confirmed. He was not at the apartment. He was not in the area. He could prove it. The theory that Kevin had sent someone or was otherwise connected to what happened inside that apartment found no support in the physical evidence. And then there was MW in those first hours after officers arrived. When police spoke to the 11-year-old, she told them a version of events that supported her mother's intruder story. She was 11 years old. She had just survived something unsurvivable. Whether out of loyalty, out of fear, out of the deep and instinctive attachment children have even to parents who have hurt them, or simply out of the shock of trauma, she held to the intruder version in those immediate hours. Most trauma investigators would recognize this response as consistent with a child survivor who has not yet reached a place of sufficient safety to tell a different truth. That moment of safety came when MW was placed in foster care, away from the immediate scene, away from the chaos and the presence of the adults who had defined her world. A caretaker in the foster placement heard what MW had to say, and what she said changed the trajectory of the entire investigation. Her mother had given them the milk with the powder. Her mother had told them to close their eyes. Her mother had led them to the bedroom. Her mother had said God made her do it. Her mother had said their father was going to take them away. And when MW had begged for her life, her mother had cut her again. Colorado Springs police sought to arrest Kimberlee Singler on December 26, 2023, 8 days after the crimes, 7 days after the 911 call. The bond was set at $10 million. She was already gone. Here is one of the most important and least examined dynamics of this entire case. Kimberlee Singler was not arrested immediately after December 19th. She was not placed under surveillance. She was treated in those first days as a victim, as a mother who had survived the brutal murder of her children, and because of that, she moved freely. There is no meaningful criticism of the Colorado Springs Police Department here. In the first hours of a crime scene, the immediate priority is medical care for survivors and preservation of evidence. You do not immediately detain a grieving mother whose children are dead before the investigation has developed. You process the scene. You gather information. You build your case. In retrospect, knowing what we know now, one can wish the timeline had been different. But the investigation moved as quickly as investigations do under the circumstances. By December 26th, 7 days after the crime, police had built enough of a case to obtain an arrest warrant. The warrant covered 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 3 counts of child abuse, and 1 count of first-degree assault. But Kimberlee Singler was not there to be arrested. She had, sometime in those 7 days, gathered whatever she needed and left. Left Colorado. Left the United States. She ended up in London. Specifically in London's upscale Chelsea neighborhood, one of the city's most affluent areas, known for its Georgian architecture, boutique streets, and a very particular kind of old money quietness. Multiple news organizations, including the Associated Press and ABC7, confirmed Chelsea as the location where she was found. Why Chelsea of all places? That question, notably, has never been answered in any public reporting. The AP specifically noted, it is not known why she ended up there. Whether she had contacts there, chose it by design, or arrived by chance entirely, no journalist or investigator has confirmed an explanation. What we do know is that on December 30, 2023, 4 days after the arrest warrant was issued, 11 days after the 911 call, Kimberlee Singler was located and arrested in London by officers of the National Crime Agency's National Extradition Unit. British authorities took her into custody. She would remain in British custody for the better part of 2 years. The United States and the United Kingdom have a long-standing extradition treaty. When the U.S. government formally requests the return of a suspect, the UK courts assess whether the legal requirements are satisfied and whether any compelling reasons exist to refuse. In most cases, the process moves relatively efficiently. But Kimberlee Singler's defense attorney, Edward Fitzgerald, had identified a specific legal argument that he believed should stop the process entirely. The argument centered on Colorado's sentencing structure. A conviction on first-degree murder in Colorado carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, no judicial discretion, no possibility of review after a period of rehabilitation. Life. Full stop. Fitzgerald argued before Westminster Magistrates' Court that this mandatory, irrevocable sentence constituted a violation of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the prohibition on torture and inhuman or degrading treatment. This defendant, Kimberlee Singler, has no real prospect of release no matter what progress she makes behind bars, Fitzgerald stated in court. This is not a frivolous argument. UK courts have accepted versions of it in other extradition cases. And so what could have been a relatively procedural extradition became a contested, multi-hearing process that stretched across most of 2024 and into 2025. Singler made her first London court appearance on New Year's Day, January 1, 2024, at Westminster Magistrates' Court. The hearing was brief. The judge postponed the next session to allow time for formal U.S. extradition paperwork to arrive. From there, the case moved through the British courts in stages throughout the year. By September 2024, the main substantive extradition hearing was underway. Prosecutor Joel Smith presented the factual basis of the case to the court on behalf of U.S. authorities, the crime scene findings, the DNA analysis on both weapons, the autopsy results confirming the manner of death and the presence of doxylamine, the GPS evidence clearing Kevin Wentz, and most critically, the account given by M.W. as documented in UK court records. The court heard about the milk with the powder, the closed eyes, the guided steps to the bedroom, the knife, the gun, and the statement about God. The hearing was adjourned in late 2024 to allow lawyers to address a specific legal question: whether former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper had ever commuted first-degree murder sentences, which would be relevant to whether the life without parole sentence was genuinely absolute and irrevocable. Lawyers needed time to research and argue this point in detail. On January 24, 2025, Judge John Zanni delivered his ruling at Westminster Magistrates' Court. He rejected Singler's extradition challenge. The human rights argument about life without parole was dismissed. In his ruling, Zanni also summarized Singler's own stated claims that her ex-husband had previously dreamt about killing his family, was always trying to frame her and get her arrested, and had likely sent someone to the home. The judge's summary of these claims was significant. It put on the formal record the nature of the narrative Singler had constructed, without endorsing it. The legal process after Zanni's ruling moved through the Secretary of State and several further procedural stages. Fitzgerald had indicated he planned to appeal, but by November 2025, the final legal barrier had been cleared. The extradition order was issued. On December 23, 2025, just over 2 years after Ellie and Aden were killed, Kimberlee Singler was extradited from the United Kingdom to the United States. The FBI and Colorado Springs police had traveled to London to take custody of her. District Attorney Michael Allen of Colorado's 4th Judicial District announced the extradition at a press conference in Colorado Springs. Today really is a significant milestone in this criminal investigation, Police Chief Adrian Vasquez told reporters. Singler is accused of committing an unthinkable act. I know these acts have deeply impacted this community, and our hearts remain with the victims. December 23, 2025. Kimberlee Singler is 37 years old. 2 years have passed since that December night. 2 years while Kevin Wentz grieved his children from an ocean away. 2 years while MW, now a teenager, carried what she survived. The case was now back where it always belonged, in an American courtroom. Singler was taken into custody upon arrival in Colorado and held at the El Paso County Jail. Court records confirmed her bond at $10 million, though District Attorney Allen indicated she was expected to be held without bond given the severity of her charges. The full charge list, confirmed by the 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office, is as follows. 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation and with intent for the deaths of Ellie and Aden. 2 counts of first-degree murder with a child victim under 12, an aggravating specification reflecting the children's ages. 1 count of criminal attempt to commit first-degree murder after deliberation and with intent for the attack on MW. 1 count of first-degree assault. 3 counts of child abuse. If convicted on the Class 1 felony murder counts, specifically the 4 murder charges, the Colorado sentencing structure that Singler's London defense team spent 2 years arguing against would apply in full. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her first court appearance in Colorado came on January 7, 2026, at the El Paso County Courthouse. Singler and her defense team waived further advisement at the hearing, formally acknowledging the charges. A preliminary hearing was subsequently scheduled for May 11, 2026. Both the preliminary hearing and a bond hearing will be conducted together that morning, the consolidation allowing the defense adequate time to obtain and review the substantial discovery materials, which include the autopsies, the DNA results, the crime scene reports, MW's documented statements, and all related investigative records. District Attorney Allen confirmed to reporters that the surviving daughter, now 13, is expected to be a key witness at trial. He declined to discuss further details of the prosecution's case beyond procedural steps, a restraint consistent with the sensitivity of the evidence and the ongoing nature of the proceedings. The defense will almost certainly challenge central elements of the prosecution's case. MW's testimony, having been contested even at the London extradition stage, will likely face vigorous cross-examination. And the "God made me do it" statement, presented by prosecutors as evidence of Singler's acknowledged awareness of her own actions, is simultaneously the foundation for any potential mental health or insanity defense. It is a double-edged element. The same statement that could form a mental health argument also implicitly acknowledges that something happened. The prosecution will use the premeditation evidence, specifically the doxylamine, to counter any diminished capacity argument. Planning and psychosis are difficult to reconcile in a legal standard that requires the defendant to have been unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the offense. As of February 2026, the case is in pretrial preparation. The May 11 hearing will be watched closely by legal observers, by Kevin Wentz's family, and by the community in Colorado Springs that still carries the memory of those December headlines. Justice for Ellie and Aden remains, for now, a horizon still to be reached. Kevin Wentz has not been a central figure in the media coverage of this case, which is appropriate, because he is a victim in this story, and victims deserve to control their own narratives, on their own timetable in their own terms. But what has been made public through his attorney Jennifer Darby's statements, and the formal press release issued in January 2024 paints a picture of a father who spent years fighting through the courts to have a relationship with his children, who had GPS evidence independently confirming his location on December 18th, and who has had to live in the aftermath of something no parent should ever have to survive. Jennifer Darby laid out the custody battle timeline publicly and deliberately. The purpose was clear. The record needed to reflect that Kevin Wentz had not been the threat, that the emergency motions and protection order filings that pointed to him as the danger had been examined repeatedly by courts and repeatedly found to be unsupported, that every time the system was asked to limit his access to his children, the system evaluated the evidence and found it did not justify that outcome. And then the children he had been fighting to see were gone. There is a particular cruelty in the timeline for Kevin. The December 16 through December 31 custody period, the one Singler refused to begin, was supposed to be the moment when he finally got to spend the holidays with his children under a court-enforced order. After 5 years of legal warfare, after every motion and hearing and allegation, the system had reached a decisive intervention. He was supposed to get his kids for Christmas. He never got that moment. What came instead was a 911 call, a crime scene, and an ocean between him and the only person charged with explaining it. Kevin has not given extensive media interviews. He has maintained his privacy, which is entirely his right. The statement issued through his attorney expressed one thing clearly: he was devastated. He loved his children, and he hoped for justice for Aden and Ellie and for his surviving daughter as she continued to heal. The surviving daughter, MW, is now 13. She was 11 on December 18, 2023. She is the only person alive who was present for everything that allegedly happened in that bedroom. She gave investigators the account that cracked the case open, and she is now the only child Kevin Wentz has left. She will carry the physical and psychological weight of that night for the rest of her life. Trauma research on children who survive parental violence is unambiguous about the complexity of what they face. The attachment systems that govern how humans relate to caregivers are fundamentally disrupted when the caregiver becomes the source of the harm. The person who was supposed to be the safest person in the world was the origin of the threat. Processing that, integrating it into a sense of self that can still function, still trust, still move forward takes time. Years. Decades sometimes, professional support, the right environment, and people who love you without condition. What we can say is that MW showed a kind of courage that most adults would struggle to access. In eventually telling the truth, in giving investigators the account that confirmed what the evidence was already pointing toward, she made a choice that no child should ever have to make. She made it anyway. Let's sit with that phrase one more time. God made me do it. When those words entered the public discourse of this case, documented in UK court proceedings and confirmed by prosecutors at the London extradition hearing, they immediately drew comparisons to one of the most thoroughly examined cases of parental filicide in American history. Andrea Yates, Houston, Texas, 2001. Yates drowned all 5 of her children in the family bathtub while in the grip of a severe postpartum psychosis. She had years of documented mental illness before the acts she committed, multiple hospitalizations, prior suicide attempts, direct conversations with her psychiatrist about thoughts of harming her children. The evidence of her psychosis was not something constructed after the fact. It was in her medical records, witnessed by professionals, described in real time. A second jury ultimately found her not guilty by reason of insanity. The Yates case established a cultural and legal template for how society processes the idea of a mother killing her children under the belief that she was commanded to do so. And the central question it raised: is this genuine delusion, or is it a claim attached retroactively to violent acts in order to build a legal defense? Is the same question now hovering over the Singler case. Here is where the evidence, at least as publicly known, becomes particularly challenging for a mental health defense. Andrea Yates had years of documented psychiatric history. Her mental state was not in dispute by the medical community. In the Singler case, the 5-year custody battle shows someone who was highly functional in a legal and strategic sense, filing motions in multiple jurisdictions, managing multi-year litigation, making tactical decisions about which allegations to raise and when. That level of functioning is difficult to square with the kind of severe, incapacitating psychosis that would normally support an insanity finding. More significantly, there is the doxylamine. You do not go to a store, purchase Unisum sleep tabs, bring them home, dissolve them in milk, and administer them to your children in a moment of spontaneous psychotic break. That sequence of actions requires planning. It requires a decision made prior to December 18th about what would happen on December 18th. That is the prosecution's core premeditation argument, and it is a powerful one. The planning implicit in the doxylamine suggests that what happened in that apartment was not the product of a sudden loss of reality. It was the product of a decision made in advance. And yet, the law is complicated. The human mind, particularly one under the kind of sustained, grinding pressure of a 5-year custody war, is complicated. Parental filicide research consistently finds that parents who kill their children tend to fall into recognizable psychological categories. There is the altruistic category, parents who kill their children out of a genuine, if catastrophically distorted, belief that death is preferable to some perceived suffering or loss the child would face. There is the acutely psychotic category, parents whose grip on reality has fractured entirely, and who kill in a state of active delusion. There is the spousal revenge category, parents who kill children as the ultimate act of destruction aimed at the co-parent. And then there are combinations, cases that don't sit cleanly in one box, that pull from multiple categories simultaneously, that resist the kind of clean psychiatric categorization that courts prefer. The Singler case has elements that could speak to more than one of these profiles. The phrase, "God made me do it, your father was going to take them away," has the unmistakable texture of the altruistic category. Based on what we know, we can assume that at some level, whatever her mental state, Singler framed what she was doing as protection rather than destruction. That losing custody to Kevin was a fate worse than death. That she was not taking her children's lives, but sparing them from something she had constructed in her mind as a greater loss. This is not rational thinking. It is not sane thinking in any conventional sense, but it is a recognizable pattern in the clinical literature, and it is likely to feature prominently in whatever defense her attorneys mount at trial. What makes the Singler case particularly difficult to categorize is the coexistence of apparent planning with what sounds, at the surface level, like delusional reasoning. Researchers and forensic psychiatrists who study these cases have long noted that the binary of sane versus insane is a legal construct that often fails to capture the genuine complexity of a person's mental state during an act of extreme violence. A person can hold distorted, even delusional beliefs while simultaneously being capable of planning, sequencing, and executing actions in an organized way. The legal standard, which requires the defendant to have been unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the offense, is a bright line drawn across what is often a genuinely murky continuum. The court will almost certainly order a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation of Singler before trial. Whatever that evaluation finds will shape the defense strategy significantly. If clinicians identify a diagnosable mental illness that may have affected her capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of her alleged actions, the defense will present that evidence. If the evaluation finds no qualifying mental disease or defect, the defense will need to construct its case on other grounds. Perhaps a challenge to M.W.'s testimony, perhaps questions about the DNA analysis, perhaps procedural arguments about the evidence chain. What the Singler case also illuminates is a broader and genuinely important systemic question that deserves more than passing attention. Research on parental filicide in the context of custody disputes has consistently identified escalating legal pressure. The sense that all avenues are exhausted, that loss is imminent and absolute, as a correlating factor in the most extreme outcomes. The pattern documented in Singler's court record maps uncomfortably closely onto the risk profile that researchers describe. 5 years of hearings, repeated rulings against her narrative, the rescinded protection orders, the failed custody exchange, the emergency court order granting Kevin Wentz law enforcement assistance on the very day investigators believe the crime occurred. This is not a framing designed to generate sympathy for the person accused of these crimes. Ellie and Aden's deaths are the center of this story, not the psychology of the accused. But it is an argument for looking honestly at what family court systems are equipped, and not equipped, to do when a custody dispute reaches this level of escalation. At what point does the pattern of an emergency motion, followed by a failed appearance, followed by a new emergency motion, trigger a different category of intervention? At what point does child welfare involvement become not just appropriate but necessary? Are there warning signs that were visible in this case's court record that, in a different system or with different resourcing, might have resulted in someone checking whether those children were safe before December 20th ever arrived? These are not comfortable questions. They imply that systems bear some responsibility for outcomes they failed to prevent. But they are questions worth asking, not to relitigate this specific case, but to build something better from its wreckage. The conversation is worth having. The children, Ellie and Aden, deserve that much from those of us still here to have it. When this case first broke in late December 2023 and into January 2024, it generated significant media attention across the United States and internationally. The BBC covered the London proceedings in depth. Reuters and the Associated Press filed wire dispatches on every major development. CBS News Colorado, the Denver Gazette, KRDO, KOAA, and ABC7 provided ongoing local reporting. Nancy Grace covered it. The People magazine piece focusing specifically on MW's account, and the chilling explanation given to the surviving daughter drew hundreds of thousands of readers. True crime communities online spent months dissecting every court document that entered the public record. The international dimension of the story kept it in the news in a way that many comparable domestic cases do not sustain. The flight to London, the arrest in Chelsea, the extradition hearings at Westminster Magistrates Court, the human rights argument that stretched the proceedings across 2 calendar years. These procedural elements gave the story a kind of narrative momentum that a straightforward prosecution timeline would not have produced. Every time a hearing was scheduled in London, every time an appeal was filed or rejected, the case returned to the headlines. It had the unusual quality of a criminal case that kept developing in ways that required ongoing coverage. But I think the deeper reason this case lodged itself so firmly in the public consciousness is something more uncomfortable to articulate than international drama. We carry, almost universally, an internal framework for what a dangerous parent looks like. It is a framework drawn largely from cases of neglect, of abandonment, of addiction, of chronic absence. The parent who doesn't show up, the parent who checked out, the parent who stopped caring a long time ago. That framework does not fit Kimberlee Singler at all. By every account available in the public record, including the accounts of attorneys who were critical of her behavior during the custody proceedings, she was present, relentlessly, intensely present. She showed up to court hearings. She filed motion after motion. She fought through multiple jurisdictions and multiple judges across 5 years. Her children were the stated organizing principle of her entire existence during that period. She was the parent who was always there. And the alleged act is one of annihilation. Deliberate, premeditated, methodical annihilation of the very people she had spent years claiming to protect. How do you hold both of those things in your mind simultaneously? The love that the custody record documents and the act that the forensic evidence describes. The mother who fought for 5 years and the apartment that first responders walked into at 12:29 in the morning. This is why people could not look away. Not because of the violence itself, exactly, though the violence was devastating, but because the case represents a specific kind of rupture in how we understand what love is and what it can become when it is warped by enough pressure, enough loss, enough desperation. It is a story about what happens when the desire to keep someone close becomes indistinguishable from the desire to control them absolutely. When protecting someone and possessing them become, in a disintegrating mind, the same thing. And that confusion, that collapse of the boundary between love and ownership, is not as alien to human experience as we would like to believe. Social media in 2024 was full of heated debates about every dimension of this story. People argued about the family court system, about whether Kevin Wentz had been unfairly targeted by years of allegations, about whether the courts had done enough, or too much, or the wrong things at the wrong times, about what a different custody outcome might have prevented. Many of these conversations were conducted with incomplete information, as public discourse about ongoing criminal cases always is. The full picture lives in court documents and autopsy reports and witness testimony, and most of that is still being assembled and reviewed ahead of trial. What the public response genuinely reflects, beneath all the noise, is a real and widespread unease about how family court systems handle the extreme end of custody conflict, about what children experience when they are the subject of proceedings they cannot control and do not fully understand, about what happens when a parent loses faith in a legal system that keeps ruling against them, and what warning signs, if any, announce that the erosion has reached a dangerous threshold. These questions do not have easy answers. They deserve more than opinion threads. They deserve research, policy attention, and the kind of sustained institutional seriousness that only comes when people in positions of authority decide that preventing the next case matters more than defending the existing system. In cases like this one, there is a risk, a constant and very real risk, that the victims become abstractions, names in a charging document, ages in a press release, data points in a forensic report. The gravitational pull of the legal proceedings, the extradition drama, the psychological analysis, the systemic debate, all of it can slowly displace the people at the center of the story. The people who deserve to be remembered not as evidence, not as a tragedy, but as themselves. Elianna Wentz, Ellie, was 9 years old. A 9-year-old girl is usually in the 3rd or 4th grade. She is at the age when best friendships feel like the most important relationships in the entire universe, where having a best friend at school is everything, and a fight with that friend can feel like the end of the world. She is at the age of deciding which books are her favorites, which teachers are kind, and which kids in her class make her laugh hard enough to forget where she is. She is at the age of beginning to develop strong opinions about everything: food, music, what she wants to be when she grows up, opinions that arrive fully formed and delivered with the kind of certainty that only a 9-year-old can project without irony. She is at the age of being entirely herself, before the world has had enough time to convince her to be something else. We do not have an extensive public biographical portrait of Ellie as an individual. Her family has chosen privacy, and that choice is theirs to make and deserves respect. What we have is her name, her age, and the photographs that circulated when the case first entered the headlines. A child with her whole future visible in her face, the way futures are visible in children's faces when no one has yet given them a reason to hide it. Aden Wentz was 7 years old, 1st or 2nd grade. At 7, chapter books are just becoming possible, that step from picture books into a story that takes more than one sitting to finish, and the particular satisfaction of getting to the end of it. At 7, you can ride a bike but you still take the corners wide. You think superheroes are real questions worth debating. Everything about the world is enormous and new and worth investigating. The scrapes on your knees are your biography. Your laugh is unedited and takes over your whole face and fills whatever room you're in. Both Ellie and Aden were buried before Christmas 2023 came and went. Before whatever gifts may have been waiting under a tree they probably helped decorate. Before the new year began. Before their father could do anything except grieve in a city that had moved on with its December as though nothing had changed on Palomino Ranch Point. Their names are in the court documents. Their names are in the autopsy reports. Their names are in arrest warrants that crossed an ocean and back, but their names do not belong only to the legal proceedings. They belong to the people who loved them, to Kevin Wentz, who spent 5 years trying to be their dad and never got to see them grow up, to MW, their big sister, who is going to carry both of them with her for the rest of her life, and to every person who has followed this case and felt the particular, irreplaceable weight of 2 children who were here and are not anymore. Ellie was 9. Aden was 7. Say their names and remember who they were, not just what was done to them. As of February 2026, the Kimberlee Singler case is in pretrial preparation. The preliminary hearing and bond hearing are both scheduled for May 11, 2026, at the El Paso County Courthouse in Colorado Springs. The defense has been given time to review the full discovery package. After that hearing, the road to trial, or to whatever resolution the legal process ultimately produces, will come into clearer focus. District Attorney Michael Allen has been measured in his public statements, consistent with the ethical obligations of a prosecutor in an active case. His office has confirmed the charges. His team has confirmed the surviving daughter's expected involvement in the proceedings. Beyond that, the details belong to the courtroom, where they will eventually be tested against the law and the evidence and 12 people who will be asked to decide what the facts mean. What comes next for MW is a question that carries its own weight in this story. She was 11. She survived something that no child should survive. She was asked to lie by the one person who was supposed to protect her from every harm the world could send, and for a brief, entirely understandable window, she did. And then she told the truth. She is 13 now. She has a father who loves her. She has people around her who are, one hopes, doing everything possible to help her build a life that is larger than December 18, 2023. That is not a small ask. It is the work of years. But she did an extraordinary thing in the middle of the worst imaginable circumstances. That matters. It should be remembered alongside everything else. The questions this case raises about family courts, about risk assessment in high-conflict custody disputes, about the warning signs that precede extreme parental violence, these deserve serious attention beyond the true crime conversation. If you are a researcher, a policymaker, a family law professional, or simply someone who wants to understand how these systems work and how they sometimes fail, this case is worth studying carefully, with honest eyes. If you or someone you know is in a domestic or family crisis situation in the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached by calling 1-800-799-7233 or by texting START to 88788. If you have any concerns about the safety of a child, please contact your local child protective services or reach out to law enforcement without hesitation. Children cannot always ask for help in ways that are easy to hear. Sometimes they need an adult to make the call. Ellie was 9. Aden was 7. Their lives were real, their futures were real, and the people who loved them are still here carrying the weight of their absence. Whatever the verdict, whatever the sentence, whatever the courts ultimately decide, those 2 facts do not change and cannot be undone. Thank you for being here and for staying with this story all the way through. Stories like this one are not comfortable. They should not be. That discomfort is the beginning of the conversation that might, one day, mean a different ending for another family. Take care of yourselves and each other. I will see you in the next one.